Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Voices of Forestry podcast. I'm your host, Seth Stephenson, the Communications Coordinator with the Arkansas Forestry Association. Now, today, we have a brand new topic and a brand new Voice of Forestry here with us. But before we get to that, I want to give a special shout out and a thank you to this month's sponsor, Farm Credit. They are a continued supporter of the show, and we appreciate that support very much. And we're going to hear a little bit more from them, actually, later on in this episode. But now, we're going to get to our guest this month. We have Peter MacKeith, the Dean of the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design at the University of Arkansas. So Dean MacKeith, thank you for joining us this month.
Thanks very much, Seth, and I look forward to the conversation.
I do too, and you know, we were kind of talking here at the beginning. I'm still unsure what this episode is exactly going to be called, but we're going to kind of shoot for the value of forests, and we don't mean necessarily a monetary value. We mean kind of like an intrinsic value to humanity is kind of, I think, where we're going. But before we get that deep in the weeds, let's talk about your background, because you're brand new to the show. We like to have people kind of explain who they are and how they got to where they are. So if you don't mind, just give us a little bit of your history.
Sure, and perhaps if you wanted to have a title for this, you could think of it as The Forest and the Trees.
There we go. I love it.
Both literally and figuratively. Altogether, as a way of thinking about our lives, as a way of thinking about leadership, as a way of thinking about the value of forests and trees to our culture. You have asked perhaps how I've come to this understanding of forests and even perhaps why I'm even on the program. It's so sometimes I think in our lives you look back reflectively, retroactively, and perhaps try to see patterns of conversations, patterns of ideas. But for me, it's also patterns of places and patterns of even geographies. And it's possible for me to say that pattern that has been quite significant for me is, in fact, located in the forest. I have grown up in forests in the Pacific Northwest, living in Seattle. I've grown up in forests in the state of Virginia, in the Appalachians. I've grown up visiting forests in the Colorado Rockies. Grown up, in fact, walking through the redwoods in California, and even through forests in New England. And then spent a significant amount of time, as we'll touch on, during the course of the conversation, walking in Finland, in particular, the birch forests, the pine forests there, and also the forests of Austria and Slovenia, beautiful spruce pine fir forests. All of which you could say, perhaps in some sense, leads me through some form of kaleidoscopic pattern to walking in a sense, the forests of Arkansas, both the hardwood and the softwood and everything in between. And beginning to see that Arkansas is part of that geographical pattern for me, and then wanting to understand what, in fact, that means relative to the work I'm doing as Dean of the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design.
Well, let's talk about that work that you're doing, because you've been doing a lot here lately, and I may just be new to the room here, but you've been doing a lot of work specifically with cross-laminated timber, which I think we've touched on the show. So could you kind of expand on what it is you have been trying to do at the University of Arkansas?
Yes, I would say actually it's more than just one form of engineered timber or wood products, such as cross-laminated timber. In fact, I've really emphasized the value of deeper understanding of forests, a deeper understanding of timberlands, a deeper understanding of wood products, certainly as they are relevant to those working in architecture or those working in landscape architecture, in interior architecture, such as the students and faculty in our school. Also, of course, into engineering and building construction. And to the extent that we, as educators, have the ability to look ahead with our students and our faculty, look ahead into a world future, also to look into current circumstances, we've really begun to think that we can associate well with our friends and allies in forestry, in forest management, in the timberlands industries, and in the wood products industries, in a sense, overall to affect the course of future architecture or future engineering or future building construction. And this, of course, very much relates to issues of climate change, action within that, and how, in fact, working with forests and trees and wood products can have a positive effect upon that future.
So I guess I'm going to back up just a smidge here, kind of going back to your kaleidoscopic view of forests from around the world. What is it about those many forests that you've visited that keeps you coming back? That's inspired your work here with the school.
Yes, here too, I want to be also clear that these are not entirely romantic visions of the forest.
Yeah.
I'm well aware that forests of the many sides of working and living within forests and relying upon them in so many ways. But I think there's a couple different ways for me that have become important. And as I say, this is both literal and figurative, that to visit the forests and to keep visiting the forests, for me, is a way of reminding myself of, in a way, an ecological understanding of the world and an ecological understanding of the work that I'm trying to do in education. An ecological approach to our economy, or an ecological approach certainly to our society and our culture. So there's that almost metaphorical understanding of the forest. Of course, the forest, a working forest has its own value, and it's I think really beneficial for us as architects to actually know where materials come from, know how they are sourced, know how they are grown, managed, cultivated, harvested, logged, sawn, etc. So there's that dimension too, which is very much related to, again, teaching and learning, also in the practice of architecture. And then there's the sheer enjoyment, of course, in those forests that are there for our enjoyment as people walking through them, understanding really where our place in nature. So it's on those multiple levels that I keep coming back to the forest, both metaphorical as well as quite literal, and in many ways quite practical too.
Now, is that something that the students there at the College of Architecture, is that something that they've picked up on, like kind of a same mindset?
I would say that, in fact, we're now making sure to introduce our students to the forest as a source of materials. We're actually very privileged in our school to have as a part of our school Garvin Woodland Gardens in Hot Springs, which many of the listeners will know is a 210-acre woodland preserve gifted to us as a school and to the University of Arkansas some 25 years ago. That, I think, is in and of itself an example of how the forest can be a teaching and learning laboratory. We bring our students there regularly. We very much are now engaged in a new project there, which is a forest education center for the benefit of everyone visiting there. So in a sense, yes, the forest is increasingly an educational environment, a context for us to communicate a lot of what we want our students to understand as values for design.
Well, and it's interesting, too, that you called it a laboratory because I know that there are foresters in school right now who are using the forest for a laboratory, but probably in a slighter different sense than how architecture students would use it. Am I wrong in thinking that?
Not at all, but at the same time, though, I think that type of collaborative communication is exactly what we're trying to encourage our students to understand. And this is where we very much want our students to engage with foresters, whether they're forestry students or those who are actually out there in the cultivation and management of timberlands and forests. Because, again, this has to do with graduating as a student with a deep sense of understanding of where resources come from, and really a sense of responsibility as to how those resources come into being and how we can be stewards of those resources, not just unknowing extractors and users of them.
Now, you've already, we kind of mentioned it here at the top of the show, but you've already implemented some of these practices into some buildings here in Arkansas, specifically at the University of Arkansas campus. So if you could talk about some of those works that you've done, just to kind of give the folks an example of what we may be talking about.
Sure, and here too, before going into those specifics, I do want to acknowledge the work that's being done in Monticello in the School of Forestry and Natural Resources there, in the Arkansas Forest Business Center, all the good work of Dean Blazier and Professor Pelkey and a lot of their colleagues now that we're working with, because everything that we do is really based on the research and the analysis that they provide. And what was clear from what's been clear from those conversations is that there's a tremendous potential for us as a state to express the health and the vitality and the opportunities of Arkansas's forests, of the entire southeastern fiber basket, so to speak, and to really represent that in built form. So at the University of Arkansas campus in Fayetteville, we've really been able to work with campus administration, university facilities management, and stakeholders across the campus to at least encourage, and perhaps in some cases actually specify, the use of wood products, of value-added wood products, more specifically engineered timber, such as cross-laminated timber and glue-laminated timber. 2 projects already fully constructed, realized. First, a library annex building for the university libraries. That was completed in 2018, a rather small building, but one that actually holds about maybe 1.5 million books of the circulating central library. These are the less circulated books, so it allowed them to be, in a sense, placed off campus in this fantastically constructed annex building. That's of glue-laminated timber frame and a cross-laminated timber envelope, of 48 feet tall. Just a marvelous sense when you walk into this library of wood. And from that success, because that building saved the university more than $1 million in ultimate construction costs, we then went on to design and build Adohi Residence Halls, which is a 700-bed, 200,000 square foot, 5-story residence hall for students on campus that it is itself a glue-laminated frame, cross-laminated timber floor ceiling panels, all of which has produced this living, learning community, a premium set of residences for students on campus. And this, too, a demonstration of the multi-story construction that's possible with these engineered timber products. The university, therefore, has become a kind of greenhouse for prototyping these constructions and bringing them into being and really becoming a national center of attention for this type of construction. There's now 2 further buildings that are now in construction on campus. The Institute for Innovative and Integrative Research, codenamed iCubed-R, that's already well under construction. There are 5 research laboratories nested within a grid of cross-laminated and glue-laminated timber. That's already well along. And then soon, to move out of the ground, is the Anthony Timberland Center for Design and Materials Innovation. That's building very close to my heart, very close to the future for our school altogether, because it's a new fabrication facility for our school and new studio spaces and classroom spaces. And that building will be entirely of wood products, whether they're glue-lam, CLT, stick framing, hardwood, softwood, cypress, and everything in between. It's a real demonstration of all the possibilities now that can be achieved in wood construction.
So I wanted you to talk about this just to kind of point out that these aren't theories that haven't been realized. These are been realized. These are buildings that are built, are in the process of being built, and there are plenty other buildings as examples in other parts of the world. Arkansas isn't necessarily super unique that we have the only CLT buildings, but there are others in the world, correct?
That's quite true. And in fact, we find ourselves now in the midst of what is I won't call it a revolution, so to speak, but it's perhaps even a return to some of architecture and engineering and construction's origins of working in wood. But there's a wonderful organization called Woodworks, which tracks the growth of these types of constructions across the United States. And if you watch their map on a time-lapse timer, you can just see the proliferation of these types of projects right across East Coast to West Coast, Gulf, all the way up into Canada. Just watch this growth. And Arkansas is very much in the center. And of course, there's so much that's happening now in the Southeast because of the southern forests, as much as there's good work happening in the Pacific Northwest and up in the Northeast. We really are, I think, in an epicenter location for this type of shift, paradigm shift perhaps, in new construction.
So this is going to be kind of a two-tiered question, but we'll start at the top here. What's it like for you as a dean of architecture, as someone who has dedicated a lot of their career to working with wood products? What's it like for you to enter into a building that has been created with these wood products? I guess in contrast to a quote unquote normal building, if you will.
Well, it's gratifying on a number of levels. It's also inspiring on another set of levels. There are increasingly studies that indicate that working within a wooden environment is beneficial physiologically and beneficial psychologically, beneficial to even work productivity. There's, of course, just the simple experiential warmth and tactility of being in such spaces. And then there's the more maybe professional understanding of what has really been achieved here in terms of structure, in terms of surface, in terms of building envelope, in terms of energy efficiencies and so forth. So again, gratifying and inspiring at the same time. And to think that potentially we're a part of this paradigm shift is also, I think, reassuring and inspiring.
So, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm learning as we go here, but are there a lot of differences in building with these types of wood products versus your normal steel constructed buildings, or are there too many differences when it comes to creating buildings like this?
One of the things that's important to understand is that in working with wood, to some extent, you're working with a material which has a long history, far longer than the histories of concrete or steel, and of course has its certain traditions of working with that material, whether in, again, heavy timber, mass timber, stick framing. Carpentry skills are, in some sense, the first construction skills, other than perhaps the stacking of stone on stone. But I think the more contemporary understanding is that the decision to work with mass timber, or generally across the whole vocabulary of wood products, really compels more and more what we understand as a completely integrated design process, in which much of the design decisions, in fact, need to be made at the front end, because you are then handing the design decisions over to the manufacturer, who will mill the wood that you need, route the mill that you need, the wood that you need, and then make sure that it arrives on time. There's a lot of lead time, it seems, in working now with mass timber construction, and yet once all of that material shows up, it goes up very, very quickly. So the other side of this is equally important, which is to say that total building construction time is condensed because of the speed of construction once everything arrives. It's also a much cleaner work site. It's also a much quieter work site. And to a certain extent, it requires a less labor force altogether, because the way in which these things are put together is essentially with long screws and a screw gun. You can bore holes if you need to, rather simply, but most often these panels come pre-bored for all of the mechanical systems. So there's I think a whole understanding now of how to decide things earlier and to work closely from the start with engineers, fabricators, manufacturers, forests, and forest sourcing, as well as then, once you're on site, the speed of construction and the safety of construction, and ultimately the cost savings of construction.
Okay. All right. Well, Dean MacKeith, I tell you what, I may have let us go a little too long here, but we're going to take a quick break and hear a little bit more from our sponsors, Farm Credit. Farm Credit understands all things ag, including timber. Rural America has trusted Farm Credit for reliable, long-term financing for more than 100 years. Financing farms, timber, rural homes, agribusinesses, and more is all they do, which means they do it really well. Farm Credit is committed to the timber industry. They have experienced staff who understand the financing needs of timber producers and timber operations. Call Farm Credit today for long-term competitive rates that'll support your timber operation success. Farm Credit of Western Arkansas, the timber lending specialist, equal housing lender. Thank you once again to our sponsors, Farm Credit. So, Dean MacKeith, you touched on your time in Finland, and I want to come back to that for a second. I guess, if you don't mind me asking, if it's not too personal or anything, what took you to Finland in the first place? Why did you visit this area?
I went to Finland, importantly for our Arkansas context, with the benefits of a Fulbright Fellowship. And many listeners may know that the Fulbright Fellowship is the world's leading international education exchange program, and that it was initiated by the leadership of Senator William Fulbright, a native Arkansan, in his time during the Senate, to really encourage not just U.S. citizens to go abroad, but for citizens from other countries to come to the United States. One of the longest relationships between the United States and another country in the Fulbright program is with Finland. I became interested in architecture in Finland while I was a student, understood that the images and buildings and figures, architects and others working that I was most interested in were strangely all from Finland or from the Nordic region, from Denmark, from Sweden, from Norway, Iceland, and so forth. And at a certain point understood that if I didn't go directly to the source of that architecture, that I would probably never fully quite gain that deeper understanding. The Fulbright Fellowship allowed me to do that. So a kind of postgraduate moment for me after achieving my professional degree. I went to Finland thinking I would stay for the 10 months that was funded by the Fulbright Fellowship. As it turned out, I stayed for 10 years.
Oh, gosh.
By virtue of being offered employment while I was there, by virtue of developing many, many friendships, by virtue of having my daughter being born there. So much, of course, is now no longer just about architecture. It's really about being part of that society and that culture. Now, an intrinsic dimension of Finnish history, a Finnish culture, Finnish understanding is as a forest nation and as a forest society and a forest culture. It is one of the most heavily forested geographies in the world. And there's a very long history of rural communities, of people moving through the forest, a long history of woodcraft, of design with wood, that has now ever more contemporary importance and is very much, of course, supported by the Finnish national government. So for me to be in Finland was ultimately not only about understanding architecture and even more about understanding life in general, but it gave me the understanding that all of this could be understood within the context of the Finnish forest altogether. Again, something transferable, which when I ultimately arrived here in Arkansas, I thought perhaps there was a way of looking similarly upon Arkansas as a forest state in which we could, as educators, citizens, foresters, architects, engineers, contractors, really anybody, see our lives reflected in the forest and build better lives out of the forest.
So is that the kind of key takeaway that you had from your decade there, was this idea of a forest state or forest nation, or was there more to it?
I would say so. There are other takeaways that are more specific perhaps to architecture and design, in which architecture and design is very much intended to be of value to everyone in society, irregardless of income level, where you've come from. The idea is that architecture is for everyone, and that good design does not have to be a luxury, that good design actually can be affordable, available, accessible, can make life better for everyone, and that, again, it's not a privilege to work with architecture in this way. It's not a luxury. In fact, it's just part of the best everyday life. So I think those are important, almost ethics, that I learned as well. But much of that, too, is rooted in the forest sensibility, too, is rooted in, call it a rural economy, or a society of rural values, right? Where honesty is valued, where your handshake means something, where directness of expression is important, and where you're really trying to make the most out of almost minimal resources. How much can you make out of a tree if you have to take it down? I think that's an ethic as much as it becomes an aesthetic. And it's really instructive, I think, for all of us. If we're going to harvest a tree, having given a great deal into it, and knowing that taking a tree down should not just be some reflexive, unthinking act, but how much can we make out of it? What can we make from its sawdust, as well as from all the small dimensioned branches, all the way through the root and stump itself? This, to me, is, again, just a larger ethic to be learned from the forest, and this is certainly what I saw during my time in Finland, and still see now, because I'm going back and forth all the time.
Well, and that's kind of something that I think many of the hunters that listen to the show can also resonate with. It's the same, that kind of old mentality of, if you take an animal's life, you use as much of it as possible out of respect to that animal. It's kind of the same thing with trees.
Absolutely. And I think here, too, this is the kind of ethic that we encourage our students to think about. Many of our students at the University of Arkansas are from Arkansas. That's the beauty of a land-grant university, of a public university, as the University of Arkansas is. And so, in some sense, our students have been brought up within that context. They've been brought up within families that perhaps live in sawmill communities, or that live in some extent in relationship to the forest. And they know, I think, or maybe have assimilated values almost subconsciously that I think are quite important for us to draw on as architects and designers. Exactly that, right? Make the most of the least, right? How to obtain the maximum of meaning out of a minimum of resources. This, to me, is a fundamental ethic that we're trying to educate.
So what do you hope that people outside of the architecture community will take away from what you're saying here on the show, what you're teaching at the School of Architecture, and what your students are doing out in the real world?
I think the one primary understanding is to understand that our school within the University of Arkansas is very attuned to the needs of this state, and very attuned to the resources of this state, and is, in fact, as the only school of the design disciplines and professions in the state, is in fact working on behalf of the entire state, which is to say, sure, our campus is up in northwest Arkansas, and the Monticello campus is there in southeast Arkansas, but we're working on behalf of everybody, all citizens, all regions of the state. And I think this appeals to our students. It's also then the larger idea of understanding that the choice to make something, to build something, is a choice of resources, and it's a choice of financial resources, material resources, and that our students will graduate knowing where things come from, the value that they have for the people who make them, the labor that goes into them, and they will be better designers for that. And by that, I mean they will be better designers for each and every citizen that they act on behalf of. My task as an educator is, in the end, not to impose a set of aesthetic understandings, but in fact, a set of ethical understandings, and to encourage our students to understand themselves so deeply that they can work selflessly on behalf of others. And to that extent, I think this forest mentality is a very good metaphor as well as a very good literal context for them to be working from.
So what's next for you, or for the Fay Jones School of Architecture? What do you have on the docket coming up?
Well, as much as we've really worked now to bring the forest, I suppose, to life within our school and within education, we are always seeking direct, practical applications. Again, really responding to need and needs of citizens, needs of the state. One critical need is in housing across the entire income spectrum, from those who are without income at all, who are tragically unsheltered, all the way to those who are having great difficulty finding affordable housing, even if they are possessed by a pretty decent income. We're very much focused now on the relationship between wood products in terms of construction costs and achieving affordable housing for people who might make $15, $16, $17 an hour, people who might live on $30,000 a year. This is this true dimension of housing that we need to get to, not just in this state, but across the country, probably across the world. And we're working on that by emphasizing the use of wood, new wood products, new forms of construction, teaching our students about those economics and how, in fact, to produce a better quality of life through wood and through affordable wood housing. So this is one big horizon. We're working now in Pine Bluff. We're working in the Southwest, around Camden, and we're working up in Northwest with prototypical, affordable wooden housing. We're rolling out a whole series of these prototypes in the coming fall. And at the same time, coming back to Garvin Woodland Gardens and our Forest Education Center, this, in fact, will be called the Whipple Family Forest Education Center. Two wonderful individuals, a wonderful family from Arkadelphia, the Whipple family, has really enabled us to work with students to design and ultimately to construct a forest education center for everyone visiting the gardens. That's what I think universities and schools should do too, which is public education to the benefit of all. And here too, I think that forest mentality is truly at service here.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at, we're sitting here at about 31 minutes. And I know we can't solve all the world's problems in 31 minutes, but if you don't mind, Dean, as we wrap up here, what is the value of forests?
The value of forests exists on multiple levels. It is not a simple answer other than it might be almost the value of the forest is the forest. But to end as I began, to say that the forest functions for us as a metaphor for a good life. I think the forest functions for us as a source of important resources altogether, whether it's the eating utensils that you might use in your cafeteria all the way to the buildings that we live in. It certainly functions as this wonderful dimension of the natural world that I think all of us should experience in order to better understand our place in the larger world and our place in the universe.
Okay. Well, Dean, thank you so much for joining me today. I don't think I could have said it any better myself. So we really appreciate you taking time. We're recording on a rare Saturday here, but we appreciate you stopping by and doing this in person with us.
Happy to be here. Greetings to all listening.
Awesome. All right. And we want to thank you guys for joining us this month as well. We want to give one more special thank you and shout out to our sponsor this month, Farm Credit. We appreciate their support of this show. And as always, we want to give a special shout out and thank you to some guy named Rob McCormick for the use of our theme song, The Same Love, which is off of his album, The Folkster. As always, we'll have a link to his website in the description of this episode, and you can find more of his music on Spotify and that website. And if you have any questions about the Arkansas Forestry Association, you can find us at arkforest.org. That's arkforest.org. And make sure you join us next month when we'll have a new topic, a new discussion, and a new Voice of Forestry.